Before I get into it, welcome back to the channel if you like stories where small lies pile up, boundaries get tested, and betrayal doesn't look dramatic until it's already done. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from, because what I'm about to tell you started with a casual girls' night text and ended with a suitcase by my front door and a code that no longer let my wife back inside. It began on a Thursday when I walked in with grocery bags and found my wife, Sierra, standing in our bedroom in front of the mirror, leaning in like she was about to meet someone important. Silver hoops catching the light, smoky eyeliner that didn't belong to coffee with the girls, and that black top she always called just a top, even though every man alive knows it's not just a top. So I set the groceries on the dresser and said, half joking and half not, date night and nobody invited me? And she didn't even look up, just said, don't be dramatic. Bree texted me, and I watched her mouth in the mirror as she added, cafe with the girls, I'll be out late, don't wait up. And I nodded like a husband who'd learned how to pick battles, but I couldn't help asking, what kind of cafe requires eyeliner like that? And she flicked me a quick look and said, the kind with good lighting. And I laughed under my breath and tucked the receipt into my wallet because I wasn't born yesterday, but I'd also been married long enough to understand that the outfit isn't the real clue. The pattern is, and back then I either didn't see a pattern yet or I didn't want to. I told her, text me if you need a ride. And she rolled her eyes, Ethan, I'm not 16. And I said, then you know how to order a rideshare if you get tired. And she capped her lipstick, kissed the air an inch from my cheek, grabbed her small crossbody bag, and tossed over her shoulder, don't latch the top lock. And I said, got it. Like that wasn't a strange thing to say. Then she left and I put the steaks in the fridge and told myself it was fine. She deserved a night out. And if I'd known where it was heading, I would have burned those steaks on purpose just so I'd have a date to mark on a calendar. The first weekend of this new routine was kind of sweet. The second weekend turned into you don't mind, right? And the third weekend she started sending the same message with different emojis like the emojis did the work of explaining. With Bree might be late. Don't wait. And within a month our house sounded like a quiet hotel lobby where only one employee shows up for the shift. Because I cooked, I plated, I ate. And her food sat untouched until I wrapped it and shoved it into the microwave like it was a favor I was doing for a ghost. I finally brought it up over breakfast, pouring coffee and keeping my voice casual. Your schedule's getting interesting, you've been out late 3 nights this week, and I added, I don't want to feel like a speed bump in your entrance. And she didn't even look up from scrolling, just said, you're overthinking, it's a phase, work's heavy, the girls are my reset. And I asked, reset from what? You're always on. And she said, exactly. And I stirred my coffee and tried to keep it calm. Okay, then let's switch some things off. 2 nights a week we eat at home. Phones down, we pick the nights. And she slid her phone into her pocket like my idea offended it. I said I needed space. I didn't say we had to sit on each other's laps. And I said, just pick 2 nights. And I watched her eyes do that quiet math where someone calculates what they can give without losing the advantage. Then she said, fine Wednesdays and Sundays, but Sundays I'll be late because of yoga. And I said, then Wednesdays plus a Saturday breakfast. And she smirked, you're counteroffering like this is a contract. And I said, it is a contract that's been running 11 years and needs an update. And she laughed, not unkindly, you're ridiculous. And I said, ridiculously reasonable. And she clinked her mug against mine and called me Mr. Attorney. Like it was cute that I wanted my marriage to have rules. That first Wednesday was clean and normal salmon. A show we both liked. Small talk about my coworker Drew and his kid hiding the TV remote in the freezer. And for 2 hours I felt like the house had a heartbeat again. Then Sunday she came home at exactly 10:05, kissed the air near my cheek again, showered, and fell asleep to a podcast. And the next Saturday she had 1 hour with Bree that turned into a rideshare at midnight and soft laughter in the hallway that I heard through the bedroom door. So I asked, everything okay? And she cracked the door and said, we're fine. Ethan, don't be the hallway monitor. And I sat up and said, I'm the guy who pays the electric bill. Do you want me to tiptoe? And she replied, I want you to appreciate silence after midnight or stay out of my way. And that earned me a look that said, I could do it. I could stay out all night and you can't stop me. That Monday I wrote the first rule down, not in a text, on actual paper and taped it inside the pantry where she kept the pretzels. Wednesdays are ours. Saturday breakfast is ours. If plans change, they change with both signatures. And when she found it, she sighed and said, "Are we 12?" And I said, "We need a marker." And she rummaged for snacks and said, "Bree's having a hard time, I'm being a good friend." And I told her, "I don't doubt she needs you, but I need you too." And she tossed back, "You're a grown man?" And I said, "Exactly." And she left the pretzels open and went upstairs, the bag crackling like its own argument. And I closed it, lined up the spice jars, and thought, is this a phase or a warning light? I decided to treat it like a phase, but I started taking notes anyway. Times, nights, what I asked for, how she answered, because when you respect yourself, you document the moments where your respect isn't returned. The next Friday at 6:12 I got the message. With Bree girls night, don't wait up, and I replied, Wednesday and Saturday are still ours, and by the way, are you wearing the good lighting outfit? And she sent a laughing emoji that felt like a pat on the head. Like I was adorable for trying. And the next day at my shop, my buddy Max watched me load a toolbox into a customer's truck and said, "Dead serious. You look like my dog when the neighbor's cat sits on the fence." And I told him, "I'm fine." And he said, "That's exactly how my ex said I'm fine before she emptied the joint account." And I admitted, "I'm rebalancing." And he snorted, "Translation, you're mad." And I said, "I'm tightening rules." And he handed me a ratchet and said, "Then write them down and stick to them." And I said, "Already did." And he went, "Good, now stop being the last one to find out." And that line stayed with me longer than it should have. After lunch, waiting on a delivery, I searched how to share location between spouses, and the feature was already there, already enabled from years ago when we lived in our first apartment, and she liked seeing when I was on my way home. Same app, new purpose, so I switched on location alerts and closed the screen because I wasn't trying to play detective. I was trying to stop playing the idiot. That evening I made pancakes, set her plate by the window like an offering, and she came downstairs right as I flipped the last batch. Hair up, and that, "I'm going somewhere" energy on her shoulders, and she said, "You made pancakes without me?" Like I'd committed a crime. And I said, "It's 6 at night, this is dinner pretending to be breakfast." And she sniffed the air and said, "Smells good anyway." And I reminded her, we said Saturday breakfast was ours. And she shrugged, "I did brunch with Bree." And I said, "Brunch wasn't on the list." And she waved it off, "We'll do it tomorrow." And I slid pancakes onto my own plate and said, "No, we'll do it Wednesday. The breakfast window closes at 11. We'll try again next weekend." And she stared at me like I turned petty overnight. "That's mean." And I said, "That's the rule." And she exhaled, softened her voice and said, "Okay. I hear you, I'll be home by 10 tonight. We'll watch something you pick." And it sounded like oil on a rusty hinge, my first illusion of real change. So I cleaned the griddle, set a timer in my head and said, "All right." And she smiled, kissed my cheek for real this time, and texted, fast with her thumbs, then said, "I told Bree I can't stay out late, see, we compromise." And I wanted to believe her so badly it almost hurt. At 10:17 I got a text, "Leaving the cafe 5 minutes?" At 10:46 she walked in laughing into her phone. "Yeah, I see you, yeah. I'm home, okay? Bye." And the timer inside me snapped, so I asked, "Traffic?" And she said, "Traffic." Like that explained a Sunday night after 10. Then added, "There was a wreck on the ring road." And she kicked off her shoes by the door like evidence, and I asked, "Want to watch something, or are you tired?" And she glanced at her screen and said, "Tomorrow I'm wiped," then showered and fell asleep like a person with no consequences following her. While I lay awake building timelines in my head and thinking about the word contract and how stupid it sounded until you realized a contract is just another word for expectations written down. Tuesday I tried again in neutral territory, outside, where our neighbor Mr. Calderon liked to sit and judge lawn edges like it was a competitive sport. And when Sierra waved at him on her way to her car, I called out, "Morning, Mr. Calderon, just so you know, we're bringing back our Wednesday dinners, so no knocking around 7. And he lifted his thermos and said, "A schedule is the best fence in a marriage." And I smiled and said loud enough for Sierra to hear, "I like fences they tell you where you can and can't step." And Sierra paused with her hand on the car door and said, "Are you giving a speech?" And I answered, "Just making sure the neighborhood knows why we'll be busy." And Mr. Calderon winked and said, "Young folks forget to eat together." And Sierra said, "Noted," and drove off. and I knew she understood what I'd done. I'd made the line public, because it's harder to pretend a boundary doesn't exist when someone else heard you draw it. That Wednesday dinner was good. She was present, talkative, told me a story about a client who brought a Labrador to her salon and wanted the dog to have bangs for summer, and we laughed like adults again, and when I asked, she put her phone in the drawer and left it there for 2 full hours, and my shoulders dropped exactly for those 2 hours, and later she curled against me and said, "See? We're fine, you overreacted." And I said, "We're getting fine." And she promised, "I'll do better, I want to." And it was soft and placed perfectly. So I took it at face value and made us breakfast the next morning. But by Thursday she was in that, just a top, again. Texting like she was planning a heist, and I said, "I thought Thursdays were yoga." And she said, "Yoga got moved." And I told her, "If you're going to be out late, tell me before you leave I'm not chasing you across the city." And she smiled like I was cute and said, "You're not my dad." And I replied, "And you're not a mystery. I like information. It keeps us out of stupid fights." And she gave me that little smug smile again and said, "You worry like an old man." And I said, "I plan like a mechanic. Systems fail when you skip maintenance." And she walked past me and tossed, "You'll survive missing a couple oil changes." And that line did something in my chest, because it wasn't just dismissive, it was confident. Like, she believed she could neglect us and I'd still run. The next day at lunch I took my own advice and adjusted my schedule. And at the shop my friend Rico, who talked as fast as his air compressor, pulled me into his bay and said, "So how's domestic bliss, brother?" And I said, "More domestic, less bliss." And he whistled. "That's the kind of sentence you say before you call a lawyer?" And I told him, "Not yet, I'm still tuning the carburetor." And he laughed and said, "You were always the checklist guy." And I answered, "Checklists either save a marriage or end it clean." Then I told him my new plan. Wednesday dinner stays, Saturday breakfast stays, the rest is first come first served. I'm not sitting at home like a welcome mat. And Rico grinned. "So you're booking your own time like a contractor?" And I said, "Exactly. Golf with you Sunday morning, cards at Max's Friday night." And Rico asked, "Want me as a witness when you tell her?" And I said, "No witnesses, just facts." And that night I told Sierra while I folded clean laundry, "I'm stepping out of waiting mode. I'll be home when I'm home unless we agreed on something. Wednesdays and Saturdays are locked. Everything else is variable. If you want time together, put it on the calendar by noon the day before." And she watched me from the doorway like I'd started speaking a new language. "You're putting me on a calendar?" And I said, "I'm putting myself on one. You've been living by your own schedule. I'm joining you there." And she crossed her arms. "So you're punishing me?" And I said, "No, I'm matching pace. If you don't prioritize our time, I won't hold empty seats." And she opened her mouth, closed it, then played the second illusion. Pure sweetness. "Let's go out Saturday, just us, no phones. You pick the place. I'll wear that dress you like." And I said, "Sounds good." But I marked it in my head, because sweetness that shows up only after a boundary is usually a payment, not a gift. Saturday came and we tried a new spot with brick walls and mid-price steaks. We talked like adults instead of opponents. She leaned toward me, laughed at the right moments. We even planned a day trip for the next month. And on the drive home, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "See? We're okay." And I said, "We can be," and parked. And the next morning she slept until 10, said she was tired, then said Bree was having a crisis she couldn't ignore, then asked if I minded if she drove Bree to an early dinner. And I reminded her about the calendar rule, and she smiled like turning it into a joke made it harmless. "I'm telling you now." And I said, "That's not how schedules work." And she sang, "I'll bring you dessert." And I answered, "Bring me respect." And she laughed like I delivered a sitcom line and went to shower. At 7-Eleven that night I texted, "What time are you coming home?" And she replied, "Out with the girls, might be late. Don't wait up." And at 9:18 I asked, "Need me to pick you up?" And got nothing. And at 10:02 I wrote, "You alive?" And at 10:23 she finally answered, "Still with the girls, phone's dying. Don't worry, I'll be late." And the little delivered bubble never turned into read. Then my calls went straight to voicemail like she'd dropped off the earth, except she hadn't, because people don't fall off maps. They fall out of someone else's effort. I opened the location app and watched her pulsing by a cheap roadside motel, one of those places with a buzzing neon sign and a line of doors with peeling paint, nowhere near Bree's house. Nowhere near any cafe, just parked beside vacancy, like a bad joke. And I stared at it until my logic ran out of polite words. Then I texted Bree. Tell Sierra I can see where she chose to spend her late night. Send her this screenshot and make sure she knows it's from me. And Bree typed half a sentence and stopped. Then 3 minutes later wrote, I'm not involved. And I replied, you're involved now. And sent the screenshot with a thumbs up, and 15 minutes after that Sierra's phone came back to life like it had been resurrected with lip gloss. Call after call after call. And I didn't answer. I just watched her move away from the motel toward our neighborhood. And that was new wheels. Turning that weren't mine, and it was also enough. I pulled the suitcase from the closet, set it on the bed, and packed her things, not mine, hers. The jeans she claimed only fit when she wasn't eating bread. The sweaters she guarded from the dryer like a mother swan. The shoes that lived in individual cloth bags because they were special. Toiletries, hair ties, that face cream she swore the pharmacy stopped carrying because good things always disappear. And when I zipped it, I rolled it to the front door and parked it beside the hall table. Then I took the spare key off her little key dish and set it on top of the suitcase like a receipt. I moved my work boots and my toolbox from the entryway into the garage and lined them up neatly like I was clearing a workspace. Then I changed the smart lock code the way I'd change a filter com. Practical. Done. She came in with a face ready to fight and stopped dead when she saw the suitcase. Are you packing? She asked, and I said, I am. And she snapped, you're leaving over this? And I wiped my hands on a rag and said, that's your luggage, I don't want it scraping the floor. And her mouth tightened before she began the performance. You think it's what it looks like? But it isn't. The map doesn't prove anything. And I said, the map says what it says. And she launched into improv. We were tired. We didn't want to drive back at midnight. We shared a room. Nothing happened. Ethan, seriously, breathe. And I replied, so you booked a motel to rest, don't be dramatic. And I added, and you turned your phone off because rest is loud? And she said, my phone died. And I looked at her and asked, then how did it come back to life the second Bree got a screenshot of your dot next to a neon vacancy sign? And she blinked once, adjusted angle. Fine. We got a room so Bree could cry in private. She's been a mess. You're making everything about you? And I laughed because sometimes laughter is the last clean sound. You've got, that's your best version? I said, I'm listening to the logistics. You picked an address you've never picked before. You told me your phone was dying, and then my calls all went to voicemail, my number. You didn't move for 2 hours. If you want me to believe a wholesome sleepover story, you should practice it in front of the mirror. And she hissed, this is a stupid little thing, we've been married over a decade. You're throwing it away because I didn't want to drive. And I said, I'm not throwing anything away, I'm putting it down. You broke it and you just confirmed it. And she stared at the suitcase like it might bite her. You can't be serious, those are my things. And I said, you're going back to the place where you said you just needed to sleep. No sense wasting the reservation. And her eyes flashed. You don't know anything, you have dots on a screen, that's not proof. And I answered, I don't need a courtroom, Sierra, I need respect, and I'm done buying it. And that's when she cried on Demand Rain, the third illusion and the last card. It was only once, she admitted, voice cracking just enough. It was stupid. It meant nothing. You can't destroy us over one mistake. We're bigger than one night. And I stood there and let the words hang between us, because they smelled like air freshener meant to cover, not clean. And I said, you want to know what late means? It means I asked for 2 nights, clear plans, your phone on, and you laughed. I built fences and you stepped over them. And now you want applause because you came home after the lights turned on. And she whispered, it was one time. And I said, you and I were one thing, now we're 2 separate things. Then I pointed at the suitcase. Take it, the spare keys on the table, you'll get an email tomorrow about logistics. And she looked around like the furniture would argue on her behalf. Then, sharpened her voice, you'll regret this, everyone will know what you did. And I said, everyone will know I left. And that was enough, and she grabbed the handle, slammed the door hard on her way out like she wanted the hinges to learn something. The suitcase bounced down the steps, tail lights flared, and she was gone. I slept like a man who finally admitted the house was on fire and stepped into the yard not happy, not healed, just honest. The next morning I printed 3 pages. One was a list of bills, one was a calendar for the next month with my time blocked out, and one was a simple letter, no exclamation points, No drama, and I took them to an attorney because I wanted a clean exit and I wanted it done by someone who makes clean exits for a living, no rage, just signatures and instructions. And when I got home, I moved her mail into a box labeled S, changed the Wi-Fi password, and ordered a new keypad lock because logistics are what you do when emotions beg for chaos. That night, I went to Max's for cards, and he looked at me differently when I sat down. "You okay?" he asked, and I said, "I'm finished." And he put a hand on my shoulder like he understood. And Rico tossed a chip into the pot and asked if I needed a couch for a few nights. And I said, "I'm fine, she has a reservation." And they whistled low, and then we played, talked football and truck parts, ate bad pizza, and I laughed more than I had in weeks. 2 days later, I met Sierra at a cafe near her salon. Mid-morning, public, witnesses everywhere, and that was deliberate, because when someone's used to controlling your time, clarity feels like an attack, and it's easier to be clear when baristas can hear you. So she walked in wearing sunglasses and fake calm like jewelry and said, "You're being cruel." And I said, "I'm being efficient." And she snapped, "You emailed me like I'm your employee?" And I replied, "I emailed because this is delicate and it needs to be documented." And she insisted again, "I told you it was once." And I said, "You told me whatever version you hoped I'd swallow." And she slapped her hand on the table. I said, "I'm sorry." And I nodded. "I heard you, and I also heard you telling Bree I'm overreacting." And her mouth fell open. "Bree told you?" And I said, "She didn't have to, you're predictable." And she crossed her arms. "So what now, you want to punish me with a long process?" And I told her, "I don't want you in the house by Friday. I'll cover 4 weeks at your motel because I don't leave people in a ditch, even when they drove themselves there. After that, you're on your own." And she tried a new angle, softer. "We could separate for a while, not blow everything up." And I said, "We are separated, I just stopped pretending." And she threw, "You're trashing a decade." And I corrected, "We built a decade, and last month you knocked down a wall. Houses don't stay standing like that." And she tried one last little cut. "You weren't exactly exciting to come home to." So I took a sip of coffee, set it down and said, "You're right, I got boring. I paid bills, fixed locks, and asked for Wednesdays. I forgot to be a circus, and I'm not apologizing for that. Go find a tent if that's what you need." And she leaned back like she'd been slapped. But it was only words, and words only sting when they're true. Then she muttered, "People will think you left me." And I said, "They'll think whatever you tell them. I'm done correcting your story." And she said, "You always liked controlling." And I answered, "I like standards." And she put her sunglasses back on and hissed, "You'll hear from me." And I stood up and said, "Send it to my email," then added, "One more thing, don't do the crying at the door visit. I work late and the code changed." And she laughed once, short and sharp, "Enjoy your freedom." And I said, "I plan to," and left her there with an empty cup and an audience pretending not to watch. That night my sister Jenna called because she could hear something in my voice she hadn't heard before. "Are you okay?" she asked, and I said, "I'm clean." And she said, "That's sad." And I replied, "It's worse because it was stupid." And she invited me to dinner and I said, "Thanks, I've got plans." And she asked, "What plans?" And I said, "Golf with Rico at 7, cards Friday, cooking something with real seasoning on Sunday." And she laughed and said, "You sound lighter." And I told her, "I am." And Friday came with a long message from Sierra, one of those paragraphs people write when they're trying to plant a version of events in your head full of "only once," "late night mistake," "you're overreacting," "we can fix this," and ending with "I'm telling people you got scared." And I replied, "Tell them whatever helps you sleep. I don't sleep next to stories anymore. Mail the garage remote back. That's it." And she didn't respond. I went to work, changed oil on a car owned by a tiny older woman who reminded me of my grandmother and looked like she could drop kick a man twice her size if he deserved it. Grabbed tacos on the way home, ate alone on my back steps while the night insects sang, and Mr. Calderon lifted his thermos from the other side of the fence and said, "You did the right thing." And I answered, "I did what I had to." And on Sunday Bree texted, "Are you okay?" And I ignored it. Then she wrote, "She's telling people you left because you're controlling." And I replied, "She can have the narrative. I'll keep the key to the house." And Bree typed back, "She's not okay, you know?" And I answered, "I warned her. I gave dates. She chose speed over brakes. It's not my job to be her mechanic. And Bree wrote, "You're funny for a guy who just lost a wife." And I replied, "I didn't lose anyone, I let someone go." And week after week life got less theatrical. I shifted my shop schedule to 4 10-hour days and kept Mondays off, fixed the back steps, finally bought a used pickup with a bed liner, and learned you can like a thing without marrying it. And I started seeing a woman named Claire from the credit union, sharp, dry humor, the type who tells you your fly is down before you walk into a room, and we took slow walks after her shifts without pretending we were anything yet. About a month after the suitcase night, I ran into Max and his wife at the grocery store by the rotisserie chickens, and she asked carefully, "How are you holding up?" And I shrugged like a shelf with fewer books, lighter, and Max grinned and said, "He's better than fine." He laughed at my dad joke this week, and I corrected, "I laughed at one," and told him not to make it weird, and nobody said the word motel. Later that night, I got one final message from Sierra. Short and neat. "Hope you're happy. People know what you did." And I wrote back, "I am? And do they know what I did?" I enforced a standard that's the only part one care about. And she didn't answer, and through a mutual friend I heard she moved into a small place across town with a roommate who owned a loud blender and a cat that hated everyone. And she started showing up in new bars on new girls' nights, trying on new dots on new maps, and none of it was my problem anymore, because what was my problem? My responsibility was routine, and my routine got clean. Coffee at 6:05, shop by 7, golf every other Sunday. On a course that pretends it's harder than it is, dinners that don't involve cold plates abandoned in a microwave, and Wednesdays stayed sacred, not out of nostalgia but because I liked the shape of a rule that holds. Sometimes people ask if I'd take her back if she cried at the door, and my answer is already sitting in my hallway, in the new lock, in the quiet that isn't empty, in the absence of manufactured sweetness, in the simple truth I never screamed, never whispered, just placed back, where it belonged like a tool. She ran her pattern, I ran my plan, and the door stopped swinging both ways. Epilogue, if you need one. Picture this: me on my porch with a glass of iced tea, a newer truck in the driveway, and a woman beside me who texts when she's going to be 5 minutes late because she respects the clock, a poker night down the street, a schedule that matches my priorities, and a house that only keeps what I invite inside. And as for Sierra, I hear she tells people I ran away, like I jumped off a sinking ship, but I didn't jump. I walked down the gangway, shook the captain's hand and said, "I don't like the destination." Then I got into my own boat and left with my compass intact, and that's all the story really needs. Not a hero, not a martyr, just a man who stopped pretending dots on a map were accidents and called them what they were. Choices, and I made mine too. I chose myself, and it turns out that wasn't a loss, it was subtraction, the kind that finally makes the numbers add up. If you made it to the end, hit like, subscribe, and comment standard if you think respect is the bare minimum. And tell me what you would have done the moment that location lit up.